I did meet Jane in February of 2017, and we dated for a little while, and a normal relationship. You would meet them for like coffee or drinks, or spend an afternoon with them. Nothing too crazy. But in July of 2017, she ended up losing her house.
She moved in with you after that.
Exactly. Yeah, she ended up losing her house, and at that point, like, we'd been dating for a few months. I cared about her. She was my girlfriend, and I didn't want to see her homeless. So I did absolutely provide her a place to stay.
So when you say she lost her house, what do you mean?
Well, she was living with a roommate at the time, and apparently they had a little falling out, and bills weren't getting paid, and they got evicted due to that. So it essentially, like college-age people, every now and again, there's just, a bad situation that leads to you not having a home. Like, not everybody experiences that type of stuff, but sometimes that happens in that age group. Like your 20s.
Yeah. Okay.
When you're not as responsible as what you would.
Okay. So like yeah. And then she moves in with you.
Yeah.
Would you have had her move in, or would you have let her move in with you at that point in the relationship if it weren't for that situation?
Absolutely not. If it wasn't for the fact that I cared about her and I actually had sympathy for her plight, I wouldn't have put myself in that situation of allowing someone that I was together with for around 6 months at that point in time to live with me, because as you very well know, like, it takes a good period of time to like really truly get to know a person and understand that they're good for you.
Sometimes 6 months can be a long enough time, though. I think.
True.
But in your case, you just didn't feel too close to her by that point.
Yeah. In terms of like just relationship, milestones, it didn't feel like a good place for us to move in at that point in time. But, like I said, extenuating circumstances led to that.
Right. Okay.
And so between July and December of 2017, we lived together, and everything was pretty much okay. Like, there wasn't really much of any issues. We seemed to, go well with each other. And I realized that the main reason behind that is that she was very, like, detached, and once I really paid attention to the situation and I really took the goggles off that, like, I was spending a lot of time working and taking care of responsibilities, like, upkeep of the house and all that.
So
I didn't realize she wasn't around as much. Like, I didn't realize
she wasn't at the house.
Yeah, she wasn't at the house. Like, even though we lived together, I didn't see as much of her as what I would think I would.
Is that what you mean by detached? As like, because when you said detached, I was thinking emotionally detached.
Well, there was a little bit of that too.
Yeah.
And it didn't seem clear to me, how you can, again, put those like blinders on and not realize things when you're in a relationship with somebody. But all this kind of came to a head when one day I had went to the gym to work out, and I was there for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. By the time I had gotten back, Jane was gone, and I noticed on my computer, my personal computer, my desktop machine that was in my bedroom, was turned on, logged in, and there was a web page opened, which was weird to me because I didn't turn that on. I turn it off at the end of the day when I'm done working. So I looked at the screen and I noticed that there was a bunch of emails that were left open, and they were clearly emails between the woman we referred to as Jane.
You can just say Jane.
Jane, yeah. And this gentleman in Denver, Colorado, this attorney that she was trading sexual favors for legal representation with.
Did it say that in the emails?
Yes, it did. In the emails, it was very explicit that she initially found herself in a pit, so to speak, like financially, and let him know that she desperately needed legal representation because she had hit and run on a cop car. And so she was afraid that the courts were going to completely and totally, bowl over her if she represented herself. So she essentially, from what I could understand, was in a mind state, not that it's acceptable or,
Well, I mean, we can leave morality out of it.
Yeah, leaving morality out of it.
I mean,
she found herself in a state where she needed money.
It's unethical for the lawyer to say, let's trade sex for legal work anyway. Like, setting aside the whole, like, whether sex work is legit or not, like, it's at least a bizarre situation where someone is in a relationship but trading sexual favors for legal counsel because they hit a cop car. That's pretty weird.
It is. Yeah, it is really weird. And ultimately, it put a lot of thoughts in my head, and I started to realize, just sitting there staring at my computer, that this actually isn't a very good person.
Right.
And that, the mere fact that someone would do something like that.
So did you have any inclination, did you have any reason to suspect, were there any clues that she might have been, I don't know, like a less than stellar person prior to the emails you discovered?
No, like I mean, maybe it's because of the fact, like I said, she was a little detached and we didn't spend as much time together as I would think. We were in that like honeymoon period, so everything seemed okay. And there wasn't really like any issues. Like there was no arguments, no nothing like that. So like her true personality traits of being someone that would, just do horrible things and have very little to no care about what it means for the other human beings involved, that was not clear at all. That was not apparent in any way, shape, or form. She did very much so seem like the woman that I fell in love with, a very sweet, caring, wonderful woman. Clearly she was not that. And I'm not basing that just on the fact that she cheated on me. I'm not petty like that. I'm basing it on the events that are going to unfold here, like the events that we'll talk about.
Right.
But that being said, I thought all these thoughts that you mentioned. This is not that great of a person.
Right.
I shouldn't be involved with them.
Right.
That they're going to do this type of stuff. It's just not great for a relationship.
Yeah.
So I waited around until she got back home, which at that point in time, I later found out she was gone because she went and met this man at a hotel and had sex with him. And I know that because she admitted that to me in the conversation that we had whenever she first got back. When she got back, I immediately said, Jane, I would like to show you something. And I pointed at, the computer screen in my room and said, look, maybe you didn't intend to leave this up, or maybe you did. Maybe you wanted me to find out so that we wouldn't be in a relationship anymore. Either way, this is unacceptable. I mean, you can't like do this to me as a person and still expect that we're going to be in a relationship. And otherwise, like honestly, I'm pretty disgusted with you that like you would think that trading sexual favors for any sort of service is something that like is a valuable use of yourself as a person.
Even like to do that is one thing, but to do that behind the back of the person you're in a relationship with and live with is like double whammy. Like
it really shows that like not only did she not care about me as a person, but she was perfectly willing to continue to use me as her like cash cow, as her like roof over her head and her provider, even though she wanted to run around and be with other men, which I'm not saying that like I want to hold that over her head. I'm merely just stating facts that I was like the carer or the provider in that situation.
And so I think I probably knew you for a month tops by the time this happened.
Yeah.
And I think like I was at your place, so we had D&D at your place. It was like a 5-person game. And I think I played with you guys for like 2 or 3 months, and maybe 1 month into it was when this happened.
Yeah.
And I remember there were like 2 or 3 weeks where I would go to your house and she wasn't there, and maybe the second time I was there I was like, oh hey, what's up, I noticed that Jane is gone. And you told, I don't remember if you told me about it or the whole table about it. I don't remember, but I remember in hindsight now I kind of wish I would have spoke up about it, because I was going through a lot of sort of self-analysis and self-discovery, or I'd been through that that process already. And so I wanted to tell you, like, just, I think men have a tendency to place their romantic affairs ahead of their, like, other considerations that they might have,
Yeah, like their own self-worth and self-value.
Yeah. And so I wish I would have said, hey, don't take her back no matter what.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know about the whole lawyer sex thing. I didn't know anything about that.
And reasonably so. I didn't want
you didn't share it.
That. That's shameful for me as a person.
Right. It's embarrassing at least.
Yeah, it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
Not shameful, but embarrassing for me as a person to admit that like I found myself in that situation, even though I wasn't the one who did it. Right.
Yeah. Well, because it reflects on your ability to judge a person's character, probably.
Yeah, very much so.
Well, anyway, and so, a couple weeks after that, you guys did get back together.
No, it wasn't a couple of weeks after that. It was a little while after that. I know it may have seemed like it was a short period of time for you just because you were only interacting in the situation when a D&D game would happen. Right. And that was kind of like stretched out.
Right.
So it was probably like, from your perspective, just a couple of game sessions.
That's what it felt like, yeah.
But at any rate, in that month of December is when, like, we ended up breaking up. So that night I tell her everything, this is unacceptable, so on and so forth. And I was even like thinking that I wanted to be responsible and kind about this. And I was like, look, I'm upset right now. I'm going to go to my friend Travis's house and I'm just going to like, unwind and blow off and like really try to understand what I'm going to do with this situation here. And, I'm going to give you your time to leave. And, like, seriously, whenever, I come back, I expect you to be gone,
Right.
And that way I'm not going to, like, be in your space or anything like that. Like, I'll be respectful of you and give you the ability to, like, leave on your own accord,
Yeah, in a sense, you didn't want to be, like, the looming boyfriend that's, like, got his, arms crossed and, like, gets
I didn't want to be this guy at all. Yeah. So, I did that and whatnot, and when I came back, she was gone. And she apparently, I found this out later, but like, she went and stayed with her stepmother.
Let's call her Carolina. You found out she went and stayed with her stepmom, Carolina.
Yeah, exactly. After I had told her everything that, it was unacceptable and that she needed to leave, and I gave her space to, accomplish that, she did. She went and stayed with her mother, Carolina, her stepmother, I should say. And, I didn't hear anything from Jane for a while. And it wasn't until February of 2018 when, just out of the blue, I was called by Jane. It was very early in February, like the first week. And she had regaled me with stories of like how she had a falling out with her stepmother, and that she was essentially homeless for a while, and that she was in real dire straits, and furthermore, that she was pregnant with what she believed to be my child, which, essentially boiled down to just one, like, broken condom incident that we had. And I didn't think anything of it because, we separated so soon after that broken condom incident. I had no way of knowing, which...
Well, plus, I mean, at that point, I would also tend to doubt that because she had been sleeping with at least one other person anyway.
Exactly, yeah. Now, the truth of the matter is that, like, the whole breakup and how everything happened, it emotionally affected me in such a way where I was really depressed. And, whenever she did contact me and she started saying the things that she was, that mindset, how, like, depression or, like, I guess heartache will put you in a situation where you'll be more willing to accept what somebody is saying and like bridge the gap.
Well, here's why I think your military experience comes into play, because you were blown up overseas and you have PTSD, and I think that factors into maybe the way you sort of, I think your reaction was caused to some degree by your PTSD. And then I also think it was caused by, I think that veterans have they have a sort of mental trick, I think, that boot camp trains them to do, which is to just almost allow yourself to become like an ordinary person that's never been through boot camp or never like been to war or never been, forced to endure like an extreme circumstance of their life. Mm-hmm. They don't really put up with bullshit in the way that a soldier might, So like soldiers, they sleep in tents and cots, they sleep in the middle of nowhere, they're trained to endure really hard situations. Mm-hmm. Like, I think it's no coincidence that a lot of homeless people are veterans, and it's because as their lives deteriorate, they almost don't notice it because they're so used to their comfort levels like here. Like everyone else, their comfort level's here. Yeah. And so a soldier, like, he doesn't even notice that his quality of life is diminishing until it gets to like almost infinitesimal. By then it's probably too late. Like by then they're like nearly homeless already. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering how much that plays into how sort of acquiescing you were, or not acquiescing, but I think it has a lot to do with your circumstance.
I see what you're saying. That is to say that I was more willing to see the situation and say, you know what, this is a challenge. This is something that can be worked through.
Or that it's acceptable to try and make the best of it, rather than like someone that's like a lot of people in relationships, they might be like, I want to divorce irreconcilable differences, right away with like small things that, whereas throughout this whole situation, it seemed to me that you were finding ways to make it work for yourself mentally and
tried to find ways to make it work with her as a person in the relationship. But again, you'll find out more about this with like the events of the story here as it unfolds. But like she was just completely and utterly unwilling to actually be at a calm state and actually be like a good, caring person. At one point, I realized that, but it wasn't clear at first. It seemed like I legitimately had a chance to work with her at the beginning, and it wasn't until, like you said, I found myself for a very long time trying to make it work for myself and trying to make it work with her in a relationship, that after a while I realized that I'm in an abusive relationship.
Right.
I'm being abused. Verbally, emotionally, all kind of physically at one point.
Yeah.
And like any other person that's abused, like you just have this like mentality that like you'll take them back for just the dumbest reasons, like you hear stories time and again of like women that are just beaten so bad by a man they have like a black eye, and then they'll go back to him. And in times past I would have been like, gosh, like, is she stupid? Like, why would she make that decision? But now I look back at it and I'm like, no, that woman is not stupid at all. Like, it's sort of like a brainwashing thing that happens to you, whereas like you identify with your abuser,
right,
and you start to think that like it's your own fault, like you're not good enough, or if you could only be better, they wouldn't be that way. So you want to fix it.
Well, and I think that's part of why. So like if you think about boot camp, there's people shouting in your face, there's people telling you to do things, you're jumping over obstacles for people. I think that there's a link there because I think it primes people to accept those kinds of situations.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
No, in a way you're right. You're right. I can definitely say there have been many situations in my life that you could describe me as bullheaded since my military experience, and I really and truly feel as though like the idea of just like pushing through like issues and difficult things is something that the military did definitely teach me. I did.
It's kind of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand it makes you able to endure things like that, but on the other hand it makes you more likely to not get yourself out of situations where you don't it's like you never realize, I don't have to endure this.
Yeah, exactly. You're more apt to like get yourself just a little bit too deep, so to speak, because like you didn't have the mental or the emotional wherewithal to say, you know what, it's time to pull the emergency line, get out, I gotta bail at this point, this is not good. Long story short, I found myself, caring that, she was homeless and that she was pregnant with, what could be my child.
Right. That totally changes everything.
Yeah, it really does, and I grew up poor. I grew up, in not a very good, household. That is to say, mostly, financially.
Right.
Is to say that, we were going from home to home and we didn't really have a lot of stability. I did have love from my mother, not so much from my stepdad, but and at any rate, I decided that I would be there for her because I did not want my children to ever have to experience the strife that I did. It was very important to me that they wouldn't have to, just like experience some of the things that like kept me up at night as a kid, like I wonder if we're gonna have food tomorrow, I wonder, so on and so forth, Well,
and you grew up without your biological father, so in some sense you probably wanted to rescue yourself from your own past too.
In a way, yes, and that's become like very apparent to me as a person these days.
At the time you had no like idea like maybe what your motivations even were. You just kind of, I don't know, unless I'm wrong.
No, you're right. I really didn't much know what my motivations were. I was really going based on instinct at that point, and my instincts were telling me that, like, look, you care about, or you did care about this woman at some point in time. She clearly made a mistake. She'd, messed everything up, and then she found herself in a bad situation, like she suffered for it. She realized, like the results of her mistakes, and, that probably made her wisen up, like mature as a person just a little bit. And, so anyways, I went ahead and, allowed her to come back and stay and, have a roof over her head.
Now this was sort of like, I think it sounds to me like you invited her back in, but not necessarily with the intent to become romantically involved with her again, more like a roommate situation? Or?
Yeah, that was more so what it was at that point, because, we still hadn't really, like, patched up anything. Things weren't really okay at that point. Mm-hmm. So yeah, like it was just supposed to be just a roommate type of scenario, and I was really just, like offering the helping hand of saying that, look, there's a chance that this could be my kid, because we did have that broken condom incident. And I want to be responsible. I want to actually be there for you. Right. And that is actually tantamount to exactly my thought process through, like, the entire thing, is that, the military taught me a few things: loyalty, duty, respect, honor, integrity, personal courage, and selfless service, right? So I wanted to, like, hold true to that and just, like, be a good person and do the right thing. Be not for anything other than the fact that it's the right thing to do. Between like February and July of 2018 there, we lived together, and
This was after the pregnancy, moved back in.
Yeah, exactly. I found out she was pregnant. We had coffee at one point, to kind of like, reacquaint and everything after the couple of 3 months there that we were separated. And at any rate, she was clearly pregnant. So, I didn't want to take the risk of, like, what if it is my kid? And then, I'm not, like, being supportive.
Right. Well, and I guess that you might have suspected she wasn't pregnant and maybe just made it up.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's the biggest reason too why, like, I also wanted to like have that time where, like, we kind of like reacquainted and got to know each other again.
Well, because if she's gonna have a kid, it's probably better that you guys figure out some kind of working relationship for the future before the kid is born.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. And so during this time, I'm not sure why exactly this happened. It's something really that in the moment I didn't really think much of it. I thought it was just like, relationship difficulty. And it's mostly the elephant in the room syndrome, like it's far too close to your face to really see anything beyond, like, what you see in your view there. So after the fact, I can clearly say that, like, she began a pattern of, really bad abusive actions that, really started to climax with her being, like, physically abusive. And
would you say that after she moved back in, that it was like neither full relationship nor full non-relationship? It was like a weird gray area that you didn't know what to do with?
Yeah, no, that's a really good way of saying it, because, like,
because, like, she wasn't sleeping on the couch, right? She was sleeping. She would sleep in your bed.
Yeah, well, I mean, not every night though. Some nights she would just sleep on the couch, and then other nights I would wake up in the morning and I would see that she was next to me, so she slept in the bed with me. So, like, it was this weird, like, gray area. And so what I honestly think happened is that at some point she started to get angry because, like, she realized that she'd become pregnant, she's going to be tied down with me because she's having my kid and all that. Clearly a situation that, like, neither one of us planned. Right. And she refused it, even though, like, neither one of us were, like, prepared for this. I'm not saying that I wanted this to happen at all. I'm more than willing to, account for myself and take responsibility for my actions. But she refused to even, like, think about the option of, like, an abortion. And in this type of situation, knowing her background, that, she legitimately Jane has an IQ of 67. She's not really...
Well, I want to make a bookmark about the IQ thing, because I'm not sure that that's true, right? Like, you found this out way later on, right?
Oh, yeah, I found it out way later on.
So let's bookmark that thought and move it to when you did discover it.
Okay, but at any rate, though, I really think she's getting mad because she'd be tied down by me.
Well, so let's talk about abortion a little bit. So she never... Are you saying she never considered it, or she didn't want to do it, or?
Well, she kept doing this back and forth thing where, like, one day she would come to me and just say, I don't want to do this, like, will you pay for it? And I'm like, like, I will support you in whatever you want to do. Like, I will do that for you if that's what you ask of me, like, and then a few days later she'd be like, no, I'm going to keep my baby. There's no way I'm ever going to. So there's a constant back and forth, which... I suppose that much I can't hold against her, because it's emotional turmoil for a woman to have to, like, make that type of decision. And far be it for me to say it's easy.
Right. Well, and I think that it would probably... So, like, men are sort of raised, at least men today are kind of raised with this idea that they can't have any sort of input to a decision like that. So I think that a side effect of that is men don't... They sort of dissociate emotionally from that decision a little bit. At least I would say that probably pro-choice men dissociate from that decision a little bit, whereas pro-life men seem to be a little more emotionally invested because obviously they have a preference, whereas pro-choice men seem to not have a preference. And I think that might have given you the ability to step back from it a little bit. Although it's Schrodinger's, like, altered life, you know what I mean? It's like... You don't know on any given day whether you're gonna have a future, like, tied to her or not, based on her decision.
Exactly, and that's my point of bringing that up, is that yes, I was living in just like this, like you said, this Schrodinger situation, whereas, like, I was a father and I was not a father at the same time, and I was in a relationship with her and not in a relationship with her at the same time. So I didn't really know what to do about that. She started, doing, like, physically abusive actions during this time. Like, I think the first one took place back in April of 2018, whereas she just flat out punched me, shoved me into a door, all in terms of her being angry with me. I mean, I'll be clearly fairly honest and say I cannot remember the exact nature of the argument, but my point here is that regardless, male or female, there is absolutely no situation in any argument that warrants someone in a relationship with somebody to become physically abusive.
Right.
So, honestly, I don't think it's even relevant, the contents of the conversation.
Right.
At any point she had the opportunity, if she was that mad with me, to just say, I'm out of here. And that would have been just fine. But, she would do that. I would call the police and just be like, hey, I was just in a situation where, like, domestic violence took place, and this woman physically abused me. Well, there's this cultural phenomenon where a lot of people believe that men don't get abused in the traditional sense of, like, a woman being the abusive party.
Right.
Obviously people know that, like, in certain situations men will abuse other men, like in, like, let's say a relationship where two men are together or anything like that. But at any rate, though, I was immediately faced with the whole fact that even though I was the abused party, they were looking at me like I was the bad person.
Right.
This and I would like to point out that this was my home. This is where, like, I lived, where I was paying the bills. I was the only one on the lease. And I would tell the cops that, like, look, she's being physically abusive with me, and I don't know what to do, because I'm not going to hit her back. I'm not going to get into a fight with her, because, not only is that not right, you don't hit women, but otherwise, that's just going to send me right to jail. That's just irresponsible.
Not only that, but you probably felt on a physical sort of gut level that, like, trauma, physical confrontation, it like raises your adrenaline, it causes your body stress, it raises your cortisol, like it has all these physical effects on you, and then that would affect your kid too. Like there's this sort of gestational period where if you've got a bunch of, I don't know, I mean, I think it's fairly obvious, you know, but like if the mother is experiencing stress, elevated heart rate, he would have elevated heart rate too.
Yeah, and all of that's just pumping right through his system.
Right.
No, I agree. But that was, you know, the first time when that took place, and I told the police, you know, exactly what happened. You know, they looked at me as though I was the guilty party. They told me I wasn't even allowed to tell her that she needed to leave and to go, like, stay somewhere else, like her mother's house or whatnot, because I felt unsafe in my home.
Yeah, so if the sexes were reversed, I mean, we all see how crazy that is, right?
Yeah, sexes were reversed. If there was a man that was being physically abusive to a woman and that was her home, she was on the lease.
And then she wasn't allowed to tell him to leave.
That's absurd. That would never happen. But, you know, again, because of this, the specific nature of it and the fact that I was in Federal Heights, that police station is just... They're just not on the up and up, you know?
Right.
And there's, this is another one of those things, there's a lot that you'll find out as this story unfolds that'll, you know, help you to understand why I would say something like that. I'm definitely not somebody who would just outright say I don't like cops just for the sake of it at all. But at any rate, the cops, you know, just told me that I just had to accept it for what it was. I had to, like, let her stay there, meaning I was, like, locked in my house. To give you a metaphor, I was locked in a cage with a monster at this point. I realized.
I guess you could have left.
Well, yeah, but, like, where am I going to go?
Right.
This is where all my stuff is at. This is where I pay my rent, you know, so on and so forth. Every single one of, like, my support mechanisms that I've provided for myself in my life exist in that home.
Yeah, and I guess there are domestic violence shelters for women, so, like...
But not for men.
See,
during this time period, one of the things that I did actually...
You were looking it up, probably.
Yeah, I did entertain that notion. I legitimately did, and I called a few of them.
Yeah.
And they told me that they would not accept a male. Even though these are federally funded institutions and they should be taking care of an American citizen, not a male or a female, they still look at me as... well, you're a man, so this is not for you. And that also plays into the whole notion of the cultural phenomenon that I was explaining earlier, that men don't find themselves in these situations, that men aren't abused and don't need support, and because we do.
And it's like a double slap in the face because you fought to defend that system.
Exactly,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. So that does bother me.
Yeah.
You know, situations like that make me feel like this society that I fought to defend, is like an angry hive of bees. That just the smallest insignificant thing will cause them to just get angry and come at you, you know? For just absolutely no reason. Just like a hive of bees. They don't know why they're mad at you. They're just going at you because you disturbed their
nest or their hive or whatever. That's a really good metaphor, a hive of bees. And and then when one bee stings you, other bees detect the pheromone of the bee
and they follow along.
Yeah.
Just like how culturally people do, you know? Like... One person will just unload on somebody and make them feel bad about themselves, and then other people will just pile on because they think it's acceptable. When, like, I mean, just a side note, I don't think it's fair to treat people that way.
No,
it's not. Like, things like that are the reason why we have the problems. Not just that, but that's a main reason why we have the problems in America that we do. Because we draw lines in the sand and we see each other on opposite sides of that line. Yet we're all part of the same tribe. That is to say, we're all Americans. So, you know, it's funny because if our tribe was smaller, like 500 people or less, we would never act this way towards each other.
No, probably not.
Yeah, but it's because we're so big and we're so spread out. But we're getting in the weeds on this. Back to the point here is that her actions continued. Jane continued to be physically abusive. Once more in May, there was a situation where, you know, she was physically assaulting me. At this point, it started off with her throwing a coffee cup at me that shattered on the wall, and then I went to go leave, and she shoved me against the wall and told me that I'm gonna fucking sit there and listen to what she has to say.
Here, let me pause that for a second. So, she threw a coffee cup at you. So I know, you know, because I was incarcerated for 5.5 years, and I met a lot of guys who had been in the system, and there was a friend of mine who had a cellmate. He was in prison because he threw his cell phone at his wife and someone else saw it. He tossed his phone into the car where his wife was sitting, And a person who observed this thought that he had thrown it in a like agitated sort of abusive way, when really he was tossing her the phone because she asked for it.
Yeah.
And as an observer, this person called the cops on them. That person ended up, I think he was from Texas.
Mm-hmm.
He had no idea he was even going to go to prison for it. His lawyer was telling him, "Oh, this is going to work itself out," and he was using rental cars to like drive to Colorado to go to attend the court hearings and everything.
Oh, because he didn't have his own vehicle?
Well, because he lived, I think because they only had one vehicle and they lived in Texas. So.
Oh, yeah, that's right, because they would have been separated in
right.
the situation. Yeah.
So, yeah, exactly. And so, the day comes when he's found guilty and they sentence him right there, and he didn't even know that he was going to be sentenced. So he's got a rental car that's parked outside the fucking court building, and he gets sent to prison. And he's like, "What about my rental car?" You know what I mean? It's
and they don't care.
Yeah, no. Yeah. No. There's no... Yeah. Anyway, so she threw a cup at you. She shoved you against the wall. She said, "You're going to hear what I have to say."
Yeah. And then she went into, yelling at me. And this is another one of those situations, like, I distinctly remember her yelling at me saying, "You're going to fucking listen to what I have to say," because of, like, the fact of being shoved against a wall and someone saying that to you, it burns in your brain.
Right.
But, like, the rest of the whole conversation...
You don't even remember what it was.
Yeah, I don't remember, like, why we were arguing, you know? It just blends all together, you know? Like, and to say that, like, we're arguing 9 times out of 10 boiled down to, like, me trying to legitimately talk to her like an adult and her just getting hysterical and, ending up yelling and screaming at me and turning it into... like a shout fest, like something clearly you can tell, like, I'm not a person that is unreasonable, that you're unable to talk to, that you can't have like a reasonable discourse with. So the fact that anything would get that bad with a person like me clearly shows that something was very, very wrong there. There was some sort of like personality clash, something that caused that.
Or a clash of expectations, or a clash of who knows what.
Exactly, yeah. So that was in May. So that's a month later that, I call the cops again, and they do exactly the same thing to me. They go as far as to literally pull me aside. They let her stay inside my house, made me step outside of my house, close my door, pull me to the side and say, "Look, like we told you last time, this is it. If we come back again, you're going to jail." And I was like, "Dude, this is my house. What am I supposed to do? You are literally locking me in a cage with a monster that will not stop abusing me, and you won't believe anything I have to say." And he essentially just brushed me off again. Yet again, like I said, it's a cultural phenomenon that, like, I must be the bad guy no matter what the circumstances, is what seemed to have reigned supreme in any one of these situations.
Well, and how much of a mindfuck is it that it's like you want stuff to work because she's pregnant, you guys are having a kid together.
Yeah.
So it's like you really don't want her to go to prison, you want her to stop being abusive.
Oh, exactly, yeah. And that would be some of the type of things that I would say, like, right to her, like, which kind of leads me into the next situation, is that she had one point where she came unglued with me and told me that I don't give a shit what you're doing in terms of, like, trying to work this stuff out, because you're not good enough for me. You're not good enough to be a dad, and whenever this kid is born, I'm gonna take you for child support, And at that point in time, I'm just like, no, like, this is ridiculous, like, we're gonna actually have a good end result here. Like, I don't want to, be like at odds end with someone that I'm having a kid with. And I would like to be in a situation where even if we're not together, like, in a relationship, like, relationship-wise, we could still co-parent as, reasonable adults. But that argument there concluded with her yelling at me and saying, "You know what? Whenever I lied to the cops and said that you raped me, I wish they would have just arrested your ass." And I was like, "What?" And I, immediately started recording on my phone. And I called her out on it. And I was like, so, like, what are you talking about? Like, was it you or your mom that, did that? Because you were staying at your mom's at that period in time.
Well, so it sounds like so what is she talking about? Because you didn't mention any of that. Was that something that happened before?
Yes. Oh, yeah. So whenever she was told to leave my place back in December and she went and stayed with her mom, this is when she said that she did it. This is when she said that she went.
So I guess you're telling me that she had put a false rape accusation against you.
Exactly.
And this is the first you heard of it?
Yeah, this was my first time really hearing about it, is, when she yelled in my face and let me know that, like, she had done that.
I see. I think, okay, so you're saying you're not sure what she's talking about. But at the very least, she was telling her friends and family this about you, and maybe...
Well, okay, so, like, the whole idea behind this is that she was staying with her mother at that point in time.
And this was after you found out she was cheating on you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So she was clearly mad because, I made her, like, leave my home.
Right.
Which I'm surprised I was able to make her leave that first time.
Considering how she ended up being...
Yeah, considering how she started squatting in my home when her abusive behavior took place. But at any rate, since she was staying with her mom during that period, that's the reason why it prompted me to ask that question. Well, what are you talking about? So you lied to the cops? Did you, your mom? Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
What kind of person's mom would go and, like, lie? And I caught her full on recording saying, no, this was not my mother. This was me. I went to the police, I lied to them and said that you raped me and sexually assaulted me. And I'm like, well, why would you do this? Why would you want to put me in prison? Because that's a prison sentence, rape.
Right.
For what? Because you're mad? And she's like, I did it because I want to keep my son. So it all boils down to the fact that she lied to the police to get me arrested, so there would never be a situation where I would ever possibly encroach on her parenting time with that kid.
So I guess...
At least that's what I understood of it.
And this all happened while... So there must have been a window of time where she knew she was pregnant, but you didn't know?
Yeah, exactly.
And so she was just kind of hatching a scheme totally without you even knowing what the hell was going on.
Exactly, yeah. Because I had no idea that in February, not in February, but in December, at this point in time, that she had, went and told the cops this. Because the cops never actually...
Right, they never followed up on it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of weird, too.
Very weird. Yeah, which kind of further points out the fact that, like, Federal Heights PD is just, like...
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, not the greatest.
Yeah.
So, she proceeds to say all this stuff that, like, she lied to them. And, like I told you, I caught this all on recording.
Right.
And the only reason why I started recording at random moments like this, when I could tell that, like, really big stuff was coming out, is because of the previous incidences.
Because the cops did nothing.
Exactly. Yeah. Where no one would believe anything I would have to say. So I figured the only possible way for me to explain and show that I'm telling the truth is to show you hard facts, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So at that point, I told her, I'm like, well, look, you know what? I don't care if the cops are going to come try to arrest me or whatever. Get out of my house. You are not going to live here after lying to them and saying that, like, I, like, raped you or whatever. And she, did this whole thing where she's like, you know what? Fuck you, and, slapped me and tried to start a huge fight about it. And, I realized that, oh God, this is going to end with me going to jail.
Right.
Again, I'm not going to lay a single hand on her. I'm not going to get down to her level as far as this is concerned. And I, yet again, went to my friend Travis's house, which was actually a coworker of mine at this time. That's the reason why we were so close. But again, went over to Travis's house, and, this whole time he's telling me, like, dude, you're so stupid. Why did you even take her back to begin with? And I agree. I was very stupid in that, but the previous circumstances that we spoke about is what really led up to that, that I cared and I wanted to do the right thing.
Well, and I guess you didn't have an idea that she would become as abusive as that when she told you she was pregnant. And then, of course, you had no idea that she lied about you in the first place. Like,
Exactly. I had no clue, like all of this stuff was completely and totally like, hidden from me until she yelled it at me.
Right.
And then I find all this out. Well,
so it's like you're telling your friend, what was his name, Travis?
Travis, yeah.
Yeah. So you're telling him, all this stuff, and he's like, why would you take her back? And because he's hearing it like you had all that knowledge about her beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. Like just like what we were talking about earlier, how it was confusing for you, and I understand why it was, because it's kind of messy.
Right.
But I mean, again. So like we separate in December and she's mad at me, goes and lies to the police in December. I know nothing because no one talks to me, involves me in this at all, or tries to get my side of the story at all during this time. And then she just shows back up again in February telling me, oh, boo-hoo, I'm homeless, please take care of me.
I remember that you called me around this time and you were like, hey, you've been to prison, like what? If someone makes an accusation, what happens? Like, you asked me something like that. Like,
it was that night. You know, when I was over at Travis's house, like we were discussing, like, what does this mean for me? And then, that's when I called you and asked for your input to see if I could really understand, like, what exactly this means. And so, me and Travis, we spoke about it for a while. He listened to the recording that I had, and he was like, "Look, man." No matter what in this situation, like what she did is a crime. You cannot go and make up a lie to the cops, but not only just a lie, but a lie of that magnitude to the police. And that you should show this to the police, this recording, and so they can clearly see that you have been abused this whole time, and you were the one that was trying desperately.
Well, and you didn't even know which police department or who she talked to, right?
Yeah.
Like, you had to figure out who the fuck she even talked to.
Yeah. So, I ended up, just staying the night there at Travis's house and whatnot. And that next morning, I come back home, and I'm making breakfast and whatnot. And, I could hear her in the bedroom and whatnot. And so I was like, you know what? Look, maybe she's just getting her stuff together. Maybe she wanted one last night, and she's going to start getting her stuff out today. And I just, told her, like, look, what do you want for breakfast, And she's like, leave me the fuck alone. And I was like, oh, well, that's cool, I'm not going to mess with you. If you want some food, I'll make some extra for you, before you head out. And she said, I told you to leave me the fuck alone, and grabbed a candle that was next to her and threw it at me, and it hit the wall, left a gouge in the wall there. And this is another one of those points where I'm like, look, this is really bad. And I told her, like, right to face, like, look, you cannot be doing this, or I'm calling the cops. And, I pulled out my phone and started recording what was happening. And she started screaming, fuck you, take my ass to jail, I don't give a shit, as a response to, me saying I'm going to call the cops. Due to her violence and everything like that. And at that point, I catch her on recording, getting to a fever pitch where she starts ripping stuff off the wall, throwing it at me, cut me bad enough that my leg was all sliced open and everything. And ended up slamming the door to the bedroom, closed, and hit her stomach in the process because she threw her whole body into it. And I called the cops right away, and I was like, look, she is violent, she's physically abusive, this is really crazy. I'm legitimately scared to be in my own home. I wasn't even here last night. I came back long enough just so I could make breakfast, and then I was going to go off to work.
You expected her to be gone when you got back.
Yeah, I really truly expected her to be gone, but I was still just trying to be a good person in that situation.
I guess you could. I'm seeing it as kind of a capitulation or a peace offering. Like, hey, I didn't realize you'd still be here. Do you want some breakfast? Please. It seems kind of like a capitulating move.
Yeah. That's really how I felt that it was going to go down. That I could be like, hey, do you want some breakfast? I could make her some food. She would, maybe go on the patio and eat. We clearly wouldn't be seeing eye to eye. But it would be quiet, tense but quiet, and then she would just leave after she had something to eat and she was ready to go for the day. But that, clearly didn't happen, and the whole chain of events took place. When the cops got there, same as any other time, right away, even with showing them that recording, they wanted to arrest me. I was the abusive party. And, I had to flat out tell him, like, look, dude, like, right here on the recording on my phone, you see, she was physically assaulting me. At no point during that entire recording did you see me lay my hands on her or do anything even to defend myself.
Right.
I just backed up and let her do what she was doing.
Right.
How can you possibly say I'm at fault?
Right.
And due to that, you could tell, like, just looking in the cop's face, he didn't want to do this.
Right.
But he knew that he was backed into a corner
Right.
and that, like, I was legitimately right. And I had solid evidence to prove she was physically assaulting me. And ended up saying, all right, fine, and took her off to the side, let her, like, explain herself, and she almost was able to talk her way out of it. And again, they came to me and was like, well, we're just gonna, like, let her go and so on and so forth. And I was like, no, dude, like, she assaulted me, and, if I was to physically assault her, I would go to jail. And the same thing needs to happen because, like, the laws of America and the laws of this land, they're not, like, drawn down the line of gender, okay? Like, the fact of the matter is it's either right or it's wrong.
Right.
If you commit a crime, you're held accountable. And yet again, he could clearly see that, like, there's no talking your way out of this. She did a crime and she deserves to, like, pay the time, do the time, pay the circumstance, or pay the, where
do the crime, do the time.
Yeah, do the crime, do the time. Yeah. And so she did. She got arrested, and she tried to lie and say that I punched her in the stomach. When she slammed the door and hit her stomach, the doorknob caused a bruise. Which, as a matter of fact, I'd like to point out, like, that's the first time that she abused my son Benjamin. Albeit he was in utero at the time. But in my personal opinion, she went out of her way and did an act that caused physical harm to an infant, in gestation. So
you're hypothesizing that might have had an effect on him.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I really and truly believe so. I mean, because the police were telling me that at that point, whenever she was showing it and claiming that I hit her, there was a huge black and blue bruise that was there.
And the only reason that and you had caught that on camera.
Yeah, not only did I catch that on camera, but you could clearly see on her stomach, there was no, like, lines where, like, a finger would be indicating, like, a punch. It was just a circular bruise with, like, just the bruise fading out, as it goes further out. The reason why I point that out is because that's another thing. Even though I had it on tape, the police tried to argue with me and say that, no, like, you did this. And I had to legitimately, like, really fight for my life at that point in time and say, no, like, I didn't do anything wrong, and show them, like, the proof of, look, I did not do this, and here you can see legitimately that there's no way I could have done it. None of, like, the evidence, none of the stuff adds up to this actually making sense. So she finally gets arrested, and this only lasts for a little while. Which it's just crazy because, again, if the roles were reversed...
What do you mean it didn't last? It only lasted a little while? Like an hour
she was only in jail like 2 hours, and then she got out, and she was right back on the streets. And the only thing that I felt was actually, like, properly done in this situation was that they did put up a restraining order, which is just an automatic thing that happens when there's a physical assault that takes place. The person committing the assault has an order put against them that they cannot be in the vicinity of the person that they assaulted. This is just standard practice. And
just as an aside, I have met people in prison who are, like, domestic abusers, and all of them, I mean, they kind of paint themselves in as angelic a light as they can when they recount their stories, but one of the commonalities is that they go to jail for a long time, even before they see, like, most of them are in jail the entire time that they're waiting for their hearings, and a lot of them, like, I knew one guy, he was in jail for so long before he hit prison, and I don't know exactly the details of his crime, but he had been away from sunlight for so long that he gave himself, like, second-degree burns just being outside all the time on the prison yard just because he was so grateful to be outside. Yeah. So to contrast the experiences of, like, which is not to, I don't want to paint domestic abusers in a positive light or compare good and bad per se, but I just want to say that, like, the
you're pointing out the inequities in
Right.
the essence that, like, if it was a man, there's no doubt that you would spend a very long time in a cell for the actions that you committed, and that's just standard practice.
Right.
However, with her, not only did this take place in July, and her court date for assaulting me wasn't until like November. So like you said, most men, they would spend that entire time
Right.
in jail waiting on that court date, but they just completely and totally let her go a few hours later, just washed their hands of it. Essentially on the other side, they said the same thing that I had been, basically had shoved down my throat, that men don't get abused, women do not abuse, like that they
Right.
don't physically assault people.
Well, the idea is that, like, even if they do abuse, it's not as harmful. But at the same time, they'll say messages like, and by they, the infamous they, I don't know who they is exactly, but
the people who make these propaganda type of things.
Yeah, like sociologists or people who develop policy, like I've had, in prison, I talked to some counselors and stuff, and one of the things the counselor told me was, sometimes mental trauma, sometimes the memory of an event, or like sometimes, emotional abuse or psychological abuse can be worse than physical abuse, or maybe even it always is, which flies in the face of the idea that a female abuser is less of an effective abuser, so to speak. So yeah, you get all these contradictory messages and they don't make sense.
Yeah.
But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh no, that's totally fine. But the whole point is that, like, she was not held accountable for her crimes, and she was let go very quickly with just nothing more than a slap on the back of the hand and a stern talking to, if even that. Which it bothers me to such a deep degree that someone just because of their gender is allowed to do the horrible, hateful acts that she did and just be completely and totally indemnified because of nothing more than just her genitalia, or her gender, I should say.
Do you feel like a second-class citizen because of this?
Absolutely. Like, I do not feel like I have a place in this world that actually means anything in this society. I feel like I'm under heel, and that essentially I'm living in a free-range prison now. Because due to the events of everything, again, that's going to unfold here, so you'll know why. But, like, I'm in a situation now where, like, I don't ever get to see my son. I have to pay my abuser to the tune of around $777 a month in child support, which, isn't that big of a deal in the essence that, like, I would willingly take care of my child no matter what. But the fact is that, like, she used this entire situation and basically used her manipulation to turn it into take everything away from Rob and give it all to me.
Yeah.
Like, she system surfed the entire time, and now she basically used it to ruin my life. Because I'm at a point now where, honestly, I really do not believe that I'll ever find love again, because the notion of finding another woman and giving her the same benefit of the doubt that I did Jane scares me. It scares me a lot, especially not only the fact of what she could physically do to me, but knowing that society gives women so much power to do just what we're discussing, just like that, with absolutely no evidence, with absolutely no proof of any kind, just merely their words.
So you're kind of speaking to, like, the corruptibility of human beings. And that kind of power, it's hard for you to trust that the average human would not use that power.
Exactly, yeah. And really, what really plays into that is that she was, for the first little while, nice. And, like, I never would ever think that she would do this type of stuff to me as a person.
So it's like almost like the niceness triggers you now because you're not sure if it's real or not.
Exactly. It always seems like it's like a mask. Like, they're hiding their true intentions. And that in and of itself, like that's what abused women go through.
Right.
Like women that get the crap beat out of them by like an abusive man.
Yeah. They have trust issues with men. Yeah.
Exactly. They look at men as like every man is going to beat on them. Right. So I think it's very reasonable that I have this like feeling inside about how this, ends up, making me a second-class citizen. Right. So there was a period of time between when she was arrested and when my son was actually born. Because my son was actually born on August the 5th. And so...
Well, and you were pretty worried too, because, I mean, how existentially frightening is it that the mother of your child is in prison and could possibly give birth to that child in prison?
Oh, yeah, and she also, like, slammed the door into her stomach, so there's no telling, is my kid okay?
Right.
And I'd like to point out that, like, even with all the horrible things that she's done to me at this point, I'm still willing to be a good person and say, you know what, that could be my kid, and I'm going to do the right thing. Well,
because you didn't know, there was no paternity test.
Yeah, there's no paternity test yet at this point. Yeah, and because like the kid wasn't even born yet, so there's no ability for a paternity test yet. But
so for all you knew, this could have been that lawyer guy's kid.
It could have been, yeah.
So this is all benefit of the doubt for you.
Exactly.
That you're giving to someone who has not earned it, basically.
Exactly.
If anything, they've earned the opposite.
Right. Yeah. Which points out what I was saying a little bit ago, that like the notion of giving someone else the benefit of the doubt scares me, because the same thing could just repeat.
Yeah.
But there was, a little bit of time that took place in between, like her being arrested there and the kid actually being born, and I didn't even know about the kid Benjamin actually like being born into this world until almost a week after his birth, when Jane came by my house with police escorts to do a civil standby and pick up all the things that belonged to her, which completely reasonable. I did not stand in her way in any way, shape, or form. I made sure that she had all of her stuff. But the thing that like I want to point out here is that regardless of anything that took place, it was pettiness that caused me to miss the birth of my son. And speaking of like how this makes me feel as a person, not only am I scared to involve myself with another woman for what she can do to me, but I don't ever want to have another kid in my life because I'm scared about what was just done to me. All my life I grew up wanting to be successful and have a good family and have a wife and kids and like live that American dream. And to feel like not only has it all been taken away from me, but in such a hateful and spiteful way, which again, there's so very much more for you to hear from this, that makes me feel that way.
Yeah, we're not even getting into fucking half of the story.
Exactly. Yeah. This is only like the first little bit, and it's already like a roller coaster of craziness.
Yeah.
And she gets all of her stuff, with the exception of like some paperwork that she just like randomly left like all over my bed and under my bed and stuff like that. She just got the big stuff. She didn't care about scraps of paper that she was leaving behind, like she just was in and out. Especially knowing the fact that a civil escort will only give you a certain period of time anyways. I think it's like 20-30 minutes that you have that the police officer can like actually be there for. So she gathered all of her stuff and she left. And during the time between that civil standby and our court date for custody, which was at the end of November, I had experienced several situations where she had called me violating the protective order, and I told her like, leave me alone, like I don't want to talk to you, and she would repeatedly call me, leave threatening messages and all kinds of stuff. Then she would start coming by my house. At one point, she actually came by my house with the kid in her arms and like turned her body like that. So like she's making herself like a shield between me and the child. Like
posturing as though you were a danger to the child.
Exactly. And this is the only time that I ever got to see my son in the flesh. This is it. This is literally the only time. She came over with him and she essentially said, I want you to drop all assault charges against me for what I did a few weeks ago, or a month or so ago at this point, or you were never going to see your son. And at that point I told her, I'm like, I'm not going to play your game. You need to leave. There's a protective order in place. I'm calling the police. You should not be here.
It's such a mindfuck because all these contradictory messages and all these contradictory urges, because it's like your instinct is probably like, well, you want to help the situation as much as you can.
Yeah.
You want to physically be there for the kid. She kept the kid. She wants your money, but she doesn't want you to have anything to do with the kid. But she also abused you. It's like, how the fuck do you untangle all of those facts, and how do you determine what the proper course of action is considering those circumstances?
You're telling me.
Yeah.
Like, that was by far and away one of the most, in terms of emotions and like trying to find the high road in the situation, hands down one of the hardest things I ever did in my life. So having to bite the bullet and make her leave like that, and call the police and let them know, like, look, like,
well, because you knew that if you let her back in your life, it's not like the abuse is going to stop.
No, not at all. It'll get worse.
And all chances are you probably eventually go to prison, because if it's not over a false allegation of you. So I remember she had made some kind of threat to you that she was going to say you abused the kid. I mean, she was just trying to tease a reaction out of you, it seems like.
Oh yeah. There were several times where before the kid was born, she would say stuff like that, like, oh, I'm just gonna say that you're abusive, that, like, you hurt your son or whatever, like.
Well, and she was telling you at first, because you told me that you thought you were having a daughter.
Oh yeah. Like, she lied to me at first and said that it was a little girl, and I found out later on that it was a little boy. At any rate, though, so there was all these times that she's violating this protective order, which, to be clear, I've been given to understand that if you're a criminal and there's a protective order with your name on it and you violate that by any circumstances,
you get arrested right away.
Right away.
Yeah.
And not only did she violate it by any circumstances, but she went out of her way to violate every single circumstance of that. You can't come within 1,000 feet of me. You're at my front door.
Right.
You can't contact me. You're calling me and leaving me threatening messages. And then on top of all that, she is tampering with a witness, because I'm a witness to a crime, and
she's bribing you.
Yeah, she's trying to bribe me to get me to let her off on all this, which is funny because I'm not the one who actually established the charges against her. It was Adams County that did, because they were the arresting party and they're the ones who charged her. So I didn't even have a choice. Even if I went to that police station and I wanted to say drop the charges,
that's true.
It wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
Because that's how these things work. Right. And it's designed that way for a reason.
Yeah, because that kind of shit happens.
Exactly.
It's pretty common for a guy to, it happens a lot where an abuse victim will forgive her abuser or try to invite him, and it varies by state. I think some states, I think Texas, for example, they won't prosecute if the victim doesn't file a charge, whereas Colorado is a state where, the state will pursue it whether or not the victim wants them to.
Yeah. There was a part that I didn't get a chance to really touch on because I just kind of glossed right past it with some of the other stuff we were talking about here, but before she actually did come back to my house on that civil standby, literally the day right after she was arrested for assaulting me, I took that recording to the police station because it was obviously, with the chain of events, it was the very next available time for me to do it, because I had went to my friend's house and I came home and then she was arrested and then emotional turmoil, and the very next day I'm like, okay, I can get my stuff together and I can go over there and talk to her.
Oh, you're talking about that recording where
where she admitted to lying about lying to the cops about me, and I took this over to the police station, and I tried to speak with the officer on duty there that's physically sitting in the station, and report the crime. And he was his name was Officer B. Kotke, and he seemed to be very blasé about it from the very first second that I opened my mouth. I almost wonder if like they just already knew my name, and so anything that Robert Wade says, you just ignore him or just brush it off or whatever.
I bet it was not so much that as they're probably just understaffed, overworked. Like, it's almost like if you've ever been in customer service and you're about to close the store and that last customer comes in and you're just like, fuck, you know, like...
Yeah, like I don't want to deal with this.
Right.
That's a really good way of pointing that out, or describing that, I should say, because that's really
how
is how
probably.
it was, yeah. And he said to me things like, they lie to the police all the time. You know, people lie to the police all the time. You know, there's nothing we're going to do about this. And, you know, I disagreed with him because I'm like, well, I understand that people do lie to the police about like small, insignificant things, like, were you speeding? No, I wasn't speeding.
Right.
Stuff like that. But this is a different lie
it was
on
like
a higher magnitude.
An attempted inducement to incarcerate you, basically.
Exactly. You know, it was literally her using the police, the law enforcement in my community as a weapon to commit abuse. Because this is abuse,
right.
Using the weapon of law enforcement. Because, you know, making up a lie to get somebody in trouble, why else did she do it?
Well, it's like, why not?
You know?
She, like, if you had the money, you could just hire a couple thugs to kidnap you. It's like the same experience.
Pretty much, yeah. You know, but at any rate, he didn't care about anything that I had to say. And I told him, I'm like, look, there's this TV show called Making a Murderer, and there was a guy that ended up going to jail for over a decade because a woman lied like this, and it was shown that she lied. You know, and I would like you to take this seriously here, because like if you don't take it seriously, I'm going to speak to the chief of police or the mayor, whoever I need to, for someone to take this seriously. Because I mean, this isn't a joke. You know, you're talking about someone who almost ruined my life, almost put me behind bars, and almost did something that, like, you can't recover from being a rapist. It's almost like you can't recover from being a murderer.
Well,
you know?
I mean, actually, in prison, murderers are treated fine, but a rapist, I mean, they'll throw you off a tier, they'll kill you, they'll beat you up, they'll extort you, like, there's...
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So, at any rate, I gave him a thumb drive with the recording on it, and I said, you know, like, hey, this is the evidence here. Like, this is literally a recording of her stating her name, stating that she lied to the police, and stating that she did it purely and completely just to get me in trouble, just so that, you know, I would not, you know, interact with my son, and I wouldn't, you know, detract from any of her time, her parenting time. It was clearly a motivational thing to, like, sweep me off the board before custody even took place.
Right.
You know, so...
which is ironic because, I mean, if you were in prison, there's no way she would be getting child support from you.
Well, exactly.
So it's like, why even... It's a like, not just cut your nose off to spite your face, but, like, pluck your eyeballs out and cut your tongue out despite your soul or something. Like,
yeah, and that point right there, I'm glad you brought that up, because that does actually show kind of a window into her personality, you know. And this is another one of those things that, like, in hindsight 2020, I look back and I can clearly see that she was someone who was irrational with, like, her decisions, and, like, she was very quick to, like, you know, violence or, like, self-sabotage or even, you know, like, destroying someone's life. Just really, she was apt to do bad things right like that.
But she hid it from you for months.
Oh, yeah. And that's the crazy thing about it. Still to this day, I'm baffled as to how she was able to, for several months, pretend to be a perfectly fine, normal person, and then just devolve into a monster. And by the way, I don't mean to say monster in a derogatory sense. I only mean to say that in a descriptive sense. It's only a descriptor, because, you know, like, what else would you call that? You know.
I don't know.
But anyways, he took my recording. He took it in the back and on his way back said, I'm going to go ahead and look at her initial report and I'll be back. He took and he, you know, booked my thumb drive into evidence, and I do it that way. I put it in quotes because when you book something into evidence, that implies that, like, it's actually going to be reviewed, and it's actually going to be used.
It probably just gets put in a bag and then put on a shelf.
Well, Specifically in this situation, they come back, or the police officer, B. Kotke, comes back, I should say, after a few minutes of me waiting in the lobby and says, well, Mr. Wade, nothing about this report says anything about sexual assault, which after the fact, I went, under FOIA, and I got copies of those police reports, the Freedom of Information
So
Act.
these are police reports made falsely about you without you knowing and without you having heard anything about it.
Exactly.
Okay. And that you only found out when she admitted that she did it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you're seeing the reports that she made after all this time. Mm-hmm. You're finally looking at them.
Exactly. Yeah. And I also got a copy of when I physically went in and reported the crime. And in the actual notes of the crime, of me reporting the crime, of that, the notes of that incident that Officer B. Kotke did type in, he went out of his way to state that he did not review the contents of the thumb drive and could care less about what it is, or what it contains.
He used the words "could care less," or you just?
Well, I'm surmising. What he did specifically use the words that he did not review any of the evidence. He just merely booked it, and that's it. And furthermore, on the original report that Jane submitted, it was stamped in red ink on the bottom of every single page, big and bold, sexual assault. So the idea that B. Kotke, after reviewing that report, came back out and told me that there was no mention of sexual assault.
So he was lying to your face.
He was lying to my face, because there's absolutely no possible way that this police officer of Federal Heights could have looked at a paper that's clearly stamped sexual assault.
And you never even heard anything about it.
Never. And this is something else that's crazy. In that original report, the original officer stated in that report that, the notes that he took after Sarah made her report, that he attempted to contact me, he did not reach me, and that he's gonna follow up. And there was absolutely no other notes that was put on that. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I am not a police officer, but let's use reason here. If you are assigned to investigate a crime of potential sexual assault or rape, would you just place a phone call or just make one, attempt at contact and just leave it at that? Or would you use your full power as an officer of the law, go to this person's house and make sure that they have to speak for themselves?
Yeah, I don't even know how it works now. Now that now that you've are showing me the back door of it a little bit, I don't even fucking know.
I know that this is a messy, kind of hard to understand situation, and I want to ensure.
It's surprising that they never went to your house. I mean, it's surprising that. It's all pretty surprising.
Exactly. And knowing the fact that there's such extenuating, surprising circumstances to this, if you don't see any of my evidence, you might think that I'm lying to you right now. Right. But when I physically put it up on the screen and you can see with your own eyes, it says sexual assault, and you can read the contents of what that report says, it clearly paints a different picture. You can clearly see that, something is very, very, very wrong. Something has been handled very improperly. Right. And, I know this sounds tinfoil hat, but it feels as though something was covered up. Right. But so this cop, made one attempt to actually talk to me, never followed up. So that's the reason why I never knew about any of this until she admitted this to me. So at this point, I had spoken with my aunt on the phone, let her know what was going on, and she tells me, you need to put in a call to the police station, and you need to request to speak with the chief of police, and run this up the flagpole, because you were in the military, there's a chain of command. Do it the right way. Talk to the next guy in line. So I attempted to do that. When I spoke to the sergeant on duty, he just completely and totally did not care at all to talk to me. He just said, this isn't my responsibility, who's the one that's investigating it? And just wanted to pass the buck off. What I like to refer to as fling the monkey. This isn't my problem. I don't want to deal with this.
What's fling the monkey?
Well, you have the monkey on your back, it's your responsibility, and then so you fling the monkey off your back onto someone else's, so it's their responsibility. Okay. It's a term that you hear in IT. People like to, change responsibility.
I can see that. Okay.
But at any rate, he did not want to discuss anything with me. So I said, okay, fine. I want to go to the next in the chain of command. I want to speak with the chief of police. And they let me know, okay, well, the chief of police is going to get through to you. I mean, he's busy right now. He's going to call you.
Right.
And so I sat back waiting for a phone call, and the chief of police never called me. However, Officer Patrick Murphy, which was the one that was actually investigating this situation, is the one who called me back. And I recorded this entire phone call because at this point I very clearly...
You didn't trust anything or anyone.
Yeah, I didn't trust the police. I didn't trust anything. I could clearly see something's wrong. People are being stubborn and refusing to do the right thing. So I have to hold everyone in this situation accountable, myself included, So I recorded the conversation, and in this conversation I attempted to speak with Patrick Murphy and tell him, look, these are the problems that have taken place, about the fact that she lied to the police, that she lied about sexual assault, and that after that, once I had been made aware of that taking place, it was at the same time that I had got a recording of her admitting to it. That was the same point that I learned. And he went into the whole fact of saying, you know what, Mr. Wade, just shut up. Because there was a big timeline that happened between December and when you came in here and reported this. Clearly, you're just trying to get her in trouble. We are not going to stack charges, which, quick side note, that's what police do. That is their job, is to stack charges. Mm-hmm. Everything that you are, guilty of, they are supposed to charge you with it. That's the way it works. Why do you think that criminals get charged with multiple things?
Well, yeah, for my crimes, they stacked 7 or 8, maybe 9 felonies against me.
Exactly, and they were perfectly happy to do that.
Oh yeah, they were.
But this kind of points out, the whole gender discrepancy. That I strongly believe because it was a woman in this situation, that they refused to do the right thing and actually, press these charges that legitimately should have been pressed because she did in fact commit a crime for a vindictive purpose. It wasn't an accident.
Right.
It wasn't, a careless, I think he might have, I just wanted to talk to somebody about this and verify. Right. It was legitimately, she knew what she was doing and she did it with a purpose and an intent. Right. And it says it right on the recording.
Right.
Well, Patrick Murphy also said he would not listen to the recording. And he went on to tell me that in Sarah's original report of sexual assault, she also claimed that I was locking her in a room and not allowing her to leave. And I pointed out to him, sir, clearly she lied about everything that she told you. I have a recording where she has stated this fact. And you're still going to say that based on just only her words and her words alone, that you're going to bring up another charge against me? And he's like, yeah, I could bring up kidnapping charges against you. And so essentially it boils down to him playing a game of softball, verbal softball. Really, if I read between the lines, it's clear that he's saying to me, shut up, do not, talk about this anymore. Do not try to press this issue or you're going to jail. I'll make up some charge to put you in jail. And, again, audience, I know that this does sound crazy, but I do have a recording of this conversation and you can hear it in all of its posterity so that you can, make a decision for yourself that I am not crazy in this situation, even though this does sound like a crazy bit of circumstances. So...
Yeah, what happens next?
Well, they did nothing about it, of course. They just completely and totally, let the whole thing go. So I went to the Adams County District Attorney's Office in Brighton, Colorado, and I went to go speak with the district attorney in regards to the fact that why are police, law enforcement within Adams County not pressing charges for a crime that was committed, not only just, a crime that, has no evidence that people think might, it's him versus her, or he said, she said, more so a crime with hard evidence that shows without a doubt who the guilty party is, and they are still refusing to press any charges whatsoever. Well, even after discussing that with Adams County District Attorney's Office, they did nothing about it. They didn't even so much as attempt to speak to the local police department on my behalf they just brushed me off and, made me feel as though, yet again, a second-class citizen. Like, I don't even deserve to be treated fairly under the law.
Well,
that's what it makes me feel.
Yeah, and so I'm curious about your emotional investment in these, the justice that you wanted, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It seems to me that you were really pursuing some kind of justice in this situation.
Yes.
And was it solely due to a sense of justice, or perhaps do you just feel like... I feel like when it comes to domestic violence and being victimized by domestic violence, I think because men have grown up with really strong messages about it, that probably has something to do with your emotional investment in something. And then I'm also wondering, maybe you thought that was it the future of your son that you were worried about, or like...
Well, there was several things that kind of all added into this situation in terms of like my internal process of how it made me feel.
Right.
Number one was the fact that, yes, like you said, growing up, I have been, taught about like domestic violence and how it's not okay and it's very wrong in any circumstance, in any way, shape, or form. There is no greater crime, in my opinion, than to betray the one that you love. So, that being said...
At any point, did you feel that you loved Jane?
Yes. Yeah, especially whenever she was I loved the sweet, wonderful woman that I met. I did not love the monster that she turned into. Whenever that mask was taken off, what was underneath, that I did not like.
So, I guess... as far as the mask phenomenon is kind of interesting because...
Well, before we go on, let me finish up here. So, it wasn't, just a sense of, I wanted justice for the sake of, her going down or her getting in trouble or anything like that. Specifically, the two biggest things in my mind that were the most important, factors for why I was so emotionally invested and, justice being meted out correctly is that I wanted to protect the next poor, unsuspecting soul that would interact with this woman because, look at what happened to me.
Right.
I have downright hardcore evidence that proves exactly what she is, and they refuse to listen to me. And I almost found myself going to jail based on her lies alone. And the next man down the line, that poor bastard may not have nearly the luck that I had. And so that's one. And then two, yes, she was so quick to be violent and abusive and verbally, abusive and all that, putting me down to me. What's going to happen whenever my son Benjamin grows up a little bit, a few years gets added to his life there, and he starts to look like me because he shares my DNA.
Right.
He's going to start to look like me at some point in time.
Right.
And then she starts to get these internalized feelings of anger. She, like I said before, she just kind of comes off the hilt. She does what she feels inside. It almost comes off to me. So I can see this situation in my mind where at some point down the line, she doesn't even realize that it makes her mad because he looks like me.
Right.
And somewhere here in the back of her head, she has this anger, and she takes it out on this poor boy and abuses him.
He's going to remind her of you, and then that's
exactly, yeah. And then the whole abusive thing just continues. So I legitimately wanted to end the cycle before it perpetuated.
So you were thinking that by holding her accountable, you had a good shot at maybe getting custody of your son, and then...
Well, not only so much that. The goal was never for me to gain custody outside of her. More so, it's the fact of her being held accountable for her actions and her being shown that that is not okay, that is not acceptable.
That's a good point. It paves the road for the possibility of a better sort of footing between the two of you.
Exactly. I meant exactly what I said at the beginning of this conversation, that my goal from the very beginning and always ever was to be able to co-parent with this woman in the most reasonable circumstances possible. And I was, basically cut off at every single opportunity that I had to try to accomplish that fact. At any rate, though, I really did not want this to continue. You know, I didn't want my son to just be the next person that gets abused. And ultimately, like I said, I wasn't looking to just say, I want her to get in trouble so that she's in trouble and I feel better about this.
Right.
I wanted her to be held accountable to her actions so that she could see that this is wrong and that society does not support these types of actions, and that she could learn to be a better person. And that would ultimately benefit her, that would benefit me, and that would benefit my son, because knowledge is power.
I guess it expresses trust in the system, and because that's ostensibly the reason that the system exists, right?
Exactly, yeah,
and,
to teach people right from wrong.
And it's no surprise that because you fought for the system, you would have an emotional investment that the system work.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And so I remember, it's just such a mystery to me why would she cultivate the mask to lure herself into, or you into her life or her into your life in the first place? Do you know any? It's like if she doesn't like you, if she never wanted to have a kid with you, why did she even bother with the mask in the first place?
Well, I found out after we were no longer in a relationship, after she was arrested for physically abusing me, from a mutual friend, a guy by the name of James. Jane was good friends with James's wife, and therefore, like, he had a good, like, kind of window into her life. He knew her more than I did, because Jane and James's wife were friends for many years. So James tells me that apparently back in her earlier years, she was into prostitution, and she developed this mentality of using people, and that no matter what, at the end of the day, she only cared about herself and what she could get out of the situation. She didn't necessarily care about any other human being involved. So I strongly believe that she saw that I did well for myself. She saw that, I had a roof over my head, I had all of, like, the stability that she needed, and she essentially, like, made herself out to be exactly what I was looking for, so that she could use that against me, to leverage that to gain all of the support from me that she wanted. Which, the only reason why I say that, it does not come from a point of feeling dejected or anything like that. It's more so from a point of, explain to me why she was perfectly good like that for a while, and then all of a sudden the mask just slipped off.
Right.
It's because she got complacent, and after a while she stopped caring. She stopped giving a shit, because she realized that she was in a position of power, and the police taught her that.
I have a theory about that, which is because I've known you for a while now, and I was in contact with you a little bit when a lot of this was going on, and I developed the theory that she was content to play along until she figured out what her next step was, and then when she got pregnant, that sort of made things more permanent for her. And I think that's when the mask slipped.
Yeah, that's when because that would actually kind of line up with the fact of why she started becoming so physically violent with me. That's something I still can't explain at this moment, because it's something that just, I feel like, came out of nowhere.
Right.
She just slowly but surely started turning into this person that would just be
and you hear it
painful.
a lot. You hear it a lot from women who are abused by the men that they're in relationships with. You hear this sort of story play out where it's like, and then he changed, and it seems to be a similar phenomenon for you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, to move on here, nothing happened. No one ever held her accountable for any one of the crimes that she committed. And therefore, she was...
When you say nothing happened, do you mean that... Because did have a preliminary hearing of sorts for that one assault, right?
Well, yeah. It was a preliminary hearing where she requested a continuance, and they pushed it out until November the 26th, I do believe. But
which is fairly common. Like that's what happened with my case too.
But what I'm specifically getting at is after reporting her to the police with hard evidence for yet another crime she committed, nothing was done about that. Nothing was done to follow up and held her accountable for committing yet another crime. And furthermore, any one of the times that she violated the protective order that was set in place by Adams County, not one single law enforcement personnel in Adams County made any effort to uphold that protective order.
And she was on bond too, right?
Yes. So she should have went back to jail.
Those would have been bond violations as well, I think.
Exactly, yeah. So she not only violated her protective order, but she also violated her bond. And, all of this was allowed to just float away. She got away with it. No one so much as, held her accountable for any bit of this. So
and eventually they dropped the charges, didn't they?
Well, we'll get to that.
Okay. I want to do a rewind. So, you mentioned that when she left a bunch of papers behind. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to talk about those a little bit.
Okay.
Because that, before we get too far in the story.
Of course, yes. So some of the papers that she left at my house were old documentation from therapists and counselors and
Why
whatnot.
was it left behind?
Well, like I said before, I think she was in a rush, and that she just didn't really care about anything small. She was more interested in getting the big stuff
So, but why were they just blown around your room?
Oh, well, a lot of it, the reason why I think that it was all over my bed and just all over the room and whatnot is these papers were originally in a backpack that was under my bed. It was a backpack that belonged to her. It was her way of keeping all of that stuff together. And when she was trying to get all of her things gathered up and leave, she just shook everything out of that bag onto the bed and then just proceeded to stuff her things into it.
I see.
So all of these papers were just there. And, she didn't put any stock into it. It's just it's just pieces of paper.
Okay,
I don't care.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so these, like I said before, were actually pretty important pieces of paper. And, I by no means just started, going through everything, but it's like this piece of paper sitting right here. It's just sitting there. You pick it up, you pick up another piece of paper with it, you create a stack. And in the process of picking everything up and creating a stack so I could, put it all away or throw it away or whatever, I noticed that all of this stuff says that, she has these really deep-seated mental illnesses that require medicines as, deeply, intrusive as lithium. That's a very serious mental illness if you're taking lithium.
Lithium is commonly prescribed for bipolar. It's also commonly prescribed for... So my mom takes lithium, I think, because she has... what's the one that bright lights can trigger a seizure?
I'm not sure what that disorder is.
Yeah, I forget what it's called. God damn it. Well, anyway, so she takes lithium. I think lithium is somewhat innocuous, but yeah, it's indicative of bipolar.
Well, the actual reports and everything that I was picking up did actually go in to say, she was bipolar, that she did have these mental illnesses. I just wanted to point out that, she was using medicines like lithium to, keep this under wraps and keep it under control. And I point that out to say, someone that has so many mental illnesses that they need that type of medicine, they should stay on that type of medicine. But she just one day stopped.
Oh, she stopped taking her medication.
Yeah, she's been off of her medication.
Did she ever? So she never talked to you about having? Yeah.
No, I never knew about any of this until I was reading the paperwork, and I knew she was off the medicine because in the whole time she was living with me, she never once took any sort of prescription medication like that.
So the whole time, so she quit taking. It's not like she got pregnant and stopped taking it. She stopped taking it before she even moved in.
Oh yeah, even back in 2017, whenever she first initially moved in with me after losing her home and becoming homeless, she still during that period when she lived with me was not taking any of this medication. And none of the paperwork there indicated that she had recovered to a point where she should no longer be taking it.
Well, usually that's not something that happens.
Exactly. You don't recover from that type of stuff. That's not, a typical end result. You're right. So the real big thing here was, and the most important one, was one of these pieces of paper was an actual full-on report from her therapist, signed and everything, that says that, before I go on, every single thing that I say here is just merely descriptors. It is not, disparaging her in any way, shape, or form. I am not trying to make fun of Jane here.
Well, and also, I had depression for almost 20 years, and I became psychotic at one point, and I was fortunate enough to learn that it was related to a food sensitivity that I had.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of times people sort of take offense at the notion that mental illness is to like say that someone is mentally ill, or to talk about it when they are, is some kind of denigration, but it's not. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you have to describe it in some way, but at any rate, though, it goes on to say in that report that she is highly incompetent, that she is not able to take care of herself, actually provide, the requirements for a healthy life and a healthy way of life. She's not physically capable in her mind of providing that for herself. And it went as far as to say in any setting she is incapable of providing that type of care for herself, and that she requires support all the time. And finally it ended with, and Jane's IQ is 67. And again, this isn't just something that I think. It is legitimately in black and white and signed off on by a therapist.
Well, when I heard you tell me that, because you told me about that maybe last year sometime.
Yeah.
And my first instinct was to think that it was bullshit, because as in she did whatever she had to do to get that report made, to somehow get on state assistance or something like that.
Which she is on state assistance, and I have honestly wondered that myself quite a bit, because I have seen moments where in the horrible things that she does them in such an intelligent way. I don't know why this is, but it almost contradicts the fact that she could be that incompetent. So and
the reason I suspected that was because I have known people that I've been incarcerated with who talk about how to fake mental illness to the point where you will get on state assistance, and they even they approach it strategically. And I'm not saying for certain that that's what she's doing, but I think that
she admitted to me several occasions that that's exactly what that's exactly what she's doing. She's not that she lied to get on state assistance, but that she's deliberately and implicitly wanting to be on state assistance.
And it's sort of like Schrodinger's fucking bullshit all over again, because it's either she's as incompetent and mentally ill as those reports claim, and all of this is just she can't be held accountable to anything, and therefore how could she have custody of the kid?
Exactly.
Or she's not, and then she's criminally liable for all this fraud.
For all of her actions that she did. But, so, during this period of time, after, attempting to report her to the police for, the crimes that she committed, and, finding out that now my son is actually born and all that, I hired on an attorney by the name of Absalom Herrera from Pearman Law Firm. And
could you pronounce that more slowly? Because they were pretty shitty, right?
They were absolutely horrible. They did not do their job in any way, shape, or form that would be tantamount to actually representing me in a reasonable manner.
So I would say pronounce the name of their firm more intelligibly.
So I hired Absalom Herrera with Pearman Law Firm, and his boss, Sean Pearman, was part of the whole situation at one point. When I hired them on, I paid my retainer and everything. I let them know exactly like we had talked about here, the circumstances of everything I had went through, gave them all this evidence to show exactly what I had stated, and asked them to request an emergency order of custody for the sake that my son needs to be in a safe situation. Where he's at with her is not safe.
Right.
She has demonstrated with her own actions that she is criminally violent. And that does lead me to my next point. But this emergency order, it either failed or it just was not, submitted or done properly.
You never heard anything about it?
Well, no, I did end up finally hearing something about it, but what would happen is I asked them to do that, then they went silent for several days, and then I would call them back and say, well, what happened? And they're like, oh, it failed, they didn't approve it. I'm like, there was no court date, there was no nothing, they just shut it down, everything, and they were like, yep, no, you're not going to get it. And this whole time, they went out of their way to not only tell me that, everything that I'm bringing to the table, showing how bad of a situation this is and showing the true reality of the nature of her actions is not something that's usable in a court of law, even though it's perfectly usable. We're talking about police reports.
It's so retarded. It's
exactly.
Stupid.
But then they went on to not represent me in court reasonably. There were several times where there was lies told in court by the other side, where there was several points where they contradicted themselves and stepped on their own feet. And these attorneys, they never once made any attempt to actually say, no, objection, and bring that up. Even though they knew everything.
Right.
They literally went in there and they sat down and they didn't even give the evidence to the judge. I'm the one who had to stand up and say, Your Honor, I would like to present this evidence to the court and hand over to the, stenographer, I want to say the name is.
The court recorder.
Court recorder, yeah. I had to physically go up there and hand it over. So they didn't even do that for me. The only thing that they did was stood up and said, who they were, who they're representing, and then they sat down and they shut up for the entire time. They didn't do anything whatsoever to actually represent me or fight for me in a court of law.
Are you talking about the hearing that I attended?
Yes. Yeah. And so you saw it flat out. They didn't do anything to help me.
So I was struck by, there was really no testimony given. It was just questions and answers. There were no statements. There was no, there was no time for you to, talk about the impact she'd had on you as far as her actions. There was there was no opportunity for you to really say anything.
So we're kind of jumping a little bit ahead. What we're talking about is that after the emergency order failed or just wasn't submitted, I strongly believe they didn't even do it because of how everything happened. It just didn't seem right. We didn't even get any paperwork saying you were not approved or denied or whatever. It was just, they said it and that's it. They expected me to believe them flat out. So at any rate, we go down the line and we're about to go to court, and just before we go to court, two big things happened. Number one, every single bit of evidence that I had given over, before I even had an opportunity, or before the attorneys, I should say, ever took the opportunity to speak with me and discuss with me what evidence we are going to use, what evidence we're not going to use, they decided to give away every single bit of my case to the attorney on the other side and had a private conversation with them behind the scenes about my case and about where I stand and about what I'm trying to accomplish and all that. And this directly led to the police coming to my front door for a HIPAA violation. They were trying to say that I somehow stole this medical information that she left in my house, mind you, that just left laying around. It's like picking up garbage off the side of the street. No one can say that you're accountable for violating their privacy if they just leave it on the ground. That's their responsibility to uphold their own privacy. So that being said, I had to speak to the police and say, no, that is not the case. You were lied to, so on and so forth. They tried to arrest me. I told them, look, you're going to have to go and get a Oh, what's that, where they can come in your house?
Oh, a warrant?
A warrant. You're going to have to go get a warrant if you want to come in and arrest me. And they left. They never came back because I didn't do anything wrong. They had no grounds to get a warrant. They had no grounds to arrest me. They were just trying to threaten me.
Right.
Which is another thing.
It's so crazy. Did any of that... Was Jane subjected to that kind of scrutiny at any point?
Absolutely not. At no point of any of the times, even when there was hard evidence to her crimes, she was never put under any form of scrutiny close to what I was put under. And at any rate, once the cops left, I called up Absalom. And Absalom...
Or I guess it's because she was arrested. I mean, you were never arrested.
Oh,
so
she was only arrested because I literally, over and over and over told the cops.
I guess it would be more accurate to say you had to jump through such hurdles to have a semblance of accountability, whereas it seems like the slightest opportunity to have you investigated or have you looked at or have you punished in some way.
Oh yeah, they jumped on it quick.
Yeah,
and they were as harsh as they possibly could be. It really and truly felt, and this is another thing that makes me feel like a second-class citizen, it feels as though not only her, but the law enforcement there were going out of their way to try to find a way to sweep me off the table because I was too much of a liability, that no one wanted to have me there causing problems. Yeah. So that being said, the cops left after I had explained to them that I did nothing wrong.
So this is after that hearing?
No.
This is before that
hearing?
Before, okay.
Yeah, this is before. The cops left, and I called up Absalom, the attorney that I had paid and fired. He would not talk to me. And I later found out it's because he knew that he made a mistake, and he violated confidentiality, attorney-client confidentiality. Right. And he didn't want to talk to me anymore. Suddenly, his boss, Sean Pearman, was the one that was, speaking with me. And this is another one. I recorded this conversation. And I have Sean on recording literally saying, look, I'm the one who had a discussion with the attorney on the other side. I'm the one who gave up your entire case and just ruined everything that we did here. The buck stops with me. And I was like, well, are you serious right now? And at that point, I was stuck in a hard situation where I was terrified, where I was like, well, you know what? Either one, I tell these people that they're fired right now, and I report them to the state bar, and then I go into court and I am not represented in any way, shape, or form with, as bad as this situation is. That was very scary.
Right.
And I did not have any money at this point because I had already spent thousands and thousands and thousands on these attorneys. I had to stick with what I had. And I'm like, look, all right, do not do anything like that again. You talk to me first before you do anything else on my case.
Right.
And, I will see you in court. And my court date was for November the 25th of 2018.
Gotcha.
And so just before then, on November the 21st, I got a call from Child Protective Services of Adams County. Letting me know that, surprise, surprise, exactly what I was afraid of happening. She was abusing my son. And that...
That's what they told you? Or?
Yes. I was told that by Rebecca Nassau of Adams County Child Protective Services that Jane had physically abused Benjamin, my son. And that it all happened in this way, that her living arrangement allowed her to be sleeping in the same room as the baby, and the baby had colic or something of the kind that caused him to be up screaming and crying during the night. And she was mad about that and did not want to listen to the baby continue crying, and she squeezed the sides of the baby's head and screamed at him to shut the fuck up. And that's how she would, abuse the kid. And this was only reported because she went to her therapist and she told her therapist exactly what she was doing, and that she had done that and whatnot, not thinking her therapist would do anything about it. And a therapist has they have
an ethical duty to report that kind of stuff.
Exactly, yeah. So the therapist reported that to the cops, and Child Protective Services was involved. Now, all this being said, before the time that I was actually contacted, so between the time that the abuse occurred and that she was reported to the police and the time that I was contacted, in between that time there, her mother, Jane's mother, the stepmother that we spoke about, Carolina, there at the very beginning, she was involved, and Jane was involved with speaking with Child Protective Services. And Jane, Carolina, and Rebecca Nassau of Adams County all sat together, and they decided, without ever involving me in this situation, completely circumventing my rights as a father. And I should stop and say, like, a paternity test had been done by this point, and my paternity was established that was my son. So I had rights as a father as of that time, and they completely and totally ignored every one of my rights, and they decided that the child would be removed from Jane's home, and that it would be put in Carolina's home, and that Jane would just show up occasionally, every once in a great while, and drop off breast milk while she was out seeking mental help for abusing a young infant, for physically abusing a young infant. Now, I mean, this is just purely from my perspective. I have to say, this is very odd. Why would you keep this child in this abusive situation and continue to allow an abusive person to have more opportunities to keep abusing an infant? I mean, this child was not even 90 days old yet, and he's already the subject of a Child Protective Services investigation. Yeah. And mind you, maybe this just might be something that I think that not other people share, like, you know, the idea with, but my thought is that why would you then put the child in the hands of the mother? Because the mother created Jane.
Yeah, you and I talked about that. Yeah, like whatever living conditions, like to the extent that environment created Jane, that same environment
is now where they're placing my son.
Right.
And stating that that's a better environment than me, which I'd like to point out that I have stability. I have my own home. Right. I have a car. I have a 40-hour-a-week job.
Well, and you work from home.
Yeah, I work from home. I pay my bills. I handle my responsibilities. I am a military veteran. I'm responsible, and I know right from wrong. I say military veteran to point out that I was taught accountability. I was taught like the right from wrong and how to handle yourself as a person with honor and integrity. And again, they completely and totally overlooked me in this.
It's like they forgot you exist.
Exactly. Or wanted to deny my existence. Basically push me out of the equation, which, again, like, I have rights as a father. How could they possibly accomplish this?
Well, even, like, getting aside from father's rights, it's just like you're a parent. And I mean, it's like they would give the child to a stranger almost. Like,
exactly.
Like, usually with CPS, it's like, oh, they'll take the child away and
give it to the other parent.
Or to a foster parent. Mm-hmm. But that's usually because there are no other parents.
Yeah.
Whereas there was another parent.
Yeah. Yeah, I was totally willing and totally able. I wanted to be there for my son. And
I remember I was talking to you at this time about the situation, and you were taking parenting classes. You were taking classes about how to, like, raise children. You were reading things online. You were buying, like, all kinds of, like, I don't remember, food and diapers and all this stuff.
Yeah, I had even looked at, like, breast milk sharing programs, which is, like, a methodology that me as a man can still get a hold of breast milk for my infant son. And essentially a wet nurse.
Yeah,
that's happened for thousands of years in human history, and there's no reason why it couldn't happen now.
Well, and plus you had the resources to, you probably, I don't know, we didn't talk about your background as far as what you do for a living. I mean, you're an IT, software engineer?
No, I'm a systems administrator.
Okay,
so I'll basically repair anything within a computer network. Yeah. But, that points out, like, I'm intelligent too, but really, the main point there is that because of the nature of my job, I get to work from home, and I'm afforded the opportunity to have a lot of free time and the ability to, be there for my son as needed. And yet, when I brought all of this out to Rebecca Nassau of Adams County and asked her, why did you make this decision? Who do you think you are? She literally said, well, Mr. Wade, you're not needed. Literally told me right to my face that I'm not important and I'm not needed, which I don't know this for a fact, but I'm fairly certain she broke the law with that because she violated my rights. That's got to be a crime in some way, shape, or form.
Well, she didn't beat you. She didn't verbally abuse you or physically abuse you, so if that doesn't get someone sent to prison, then telling someone they're not needed is certainly not going to get them sent to prison.
Oh, of course. I tried to run this up the flagpole and speak with her boss about it, and essentially they stifled me there at that Child Protective Services office, and like they all, even the boss, just decided that I'm the bad guy, which is consistent with, everything that's been happening to me since day one.
Right.
Literally just because of my genitalia alone, not because of any other facet of who I am as a person, of my personality or anything. Only what genitalia I have hanging between my legs. People have decided that I'm a bad person and that I am not a viable candidate to be a good father or a good parent to my child. So,
I mean, you're certainly, just because you're a man, you're probably a worse parent in their eyes than someone who abuses their partner, abuses their children. You know what I mean? You could make the argument that, the average woman is more nurturing than the average man, but someone who has all this documentation of being mentally ill, who, although I doubt it, has this low IQ, someone who has, been homeless, someone who has abused people on record, who has been physically violent on record.
That's a good point. She not only abused me, but her ex-partners, I found, and I actually dug up police reports in Adams County of her being arrested for physically assaulting ex-partners. So she has a long paper trail of this.
Right. So, even if you were to say, on average, children should be with their mothers, it seems like this is not an average situation.
Well, I guess a better way to put it, in my opinion, would be an exception to the rule is not a rule to the exception.
Right.
That is to say that, okay, fine. I will give it to, whoever says that, okay, in a typical scenario, a mother is more, looked as, the parent that you're going to want.
Well, and I'm not even sure that that's true anymore, because they're starting to show studies are starting to show that two parents are better than either parent.
I couldn't agree more.
Right.
Yeah, the two-parent model is the best possible scenario, and that's the reason why I would love more than anything to be able to co-parent in a reasonable way. But as you've kind of been given to understand up to this point, every time that I have tried to do that reasonable route, these are the things that she does to me.
Right.
These are the things that happen to me, and I literally get shut out and treated like a second-class citizen at every single point.
And it's not even her doing it; it's the whole system.
Well, it's a combination of her and the system. The inequities in the system.
And I guess all she would have to do is consent to a shared parenting arrangement, and they'd probably not give you all this bullshit.
No, exactly.
I guess there is some element of her doing it to you.
A bit, yes. Yeah, she holds all the power. She could say that I have the ability to see my son, but see, instead of doing that during this whole period, she decided to flip the script and do the same thing that she always does and try to lie and manipulate the situation. And she told everyone, her attorneys included, that I was the bad person. I was the abusive party that lied and said I was like an alcoholic or something. You know me, I don't even drink.
Right.
And made up all this stuff about me and submitted paperwork to the court and said that I'm the abusive party and that I do not get any parenting time until a judge orders it to actually happen. But anyways, so this happens just a few days before the actual custody hearing. That leads us to the 25th of November, the actual custody hearing, which we kind of got into just a little bit earlier, whereas these attorneys did not do anything to actually represent me and support me in my goal of actually succeeding in winning custody or getting partial custody of my son, so I could be in his life. And on top of that, in this actual court hearing, as you very well saw because you were present for, Judge Beecham, right? Judge Beecham of Adams County? It was either Beecham or Meacham.
I think it was Meacham with an M.
Okay, so Meacham of Adams County. Either way, you guys can look it up. He's a judge in Adams County. He works at the Brighton courthouse. This is where all of this took place. And at any rate, he made fun of me for having a protective order, which I didn't even get put in place myself. It was a mandatory protective order. Tells me that this poor defenseless woman, there's no way that she would have done the things and that, I just need to completely and totally give up this protective order and sign off on it and say that it's no longer needed. Again, I didn't even put it in place. It was the district attorney of Adams County that put that in place.
And I mean, just imagine a judge saying that to a woman who has a protective order against her husband.
Oh, absolutely not. That would never in a million years happen. It would not fly. There's no way that a woman that was physically abused would be in a scenario where she was told that a protective order is not needed.
I mean, I think you could make an argument that if a judge told a female abuse victim that, it would be evidence of a systemic, sexist sort of system, right? Like a systemic, sexist problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah. On top of making fun of me for having that protective order and telling me I need to drop it for no reason other than the fact that women do not abuse, yet again, this repeating thing that women don't abuse and that men cannot be abused, that he refused to even acknowledge that that was a possibility, that happened to me.
He never said that men can't be abused, but his
demeanor,
his attitude suggests that, that's kind of his assumption.
Exactly. Yeah. I should clarify that, I'm putting this together myself and how it made me feel. But yeah, absolutely, based on the way his demeanor, he really put it off as how dare you come in this courtroom trying to protect yourself.
Right, yeah.
But at any rate, he then went on to completely ignore every single circumstance relating to this situation, did not care anything of what she did wrong, and then proceeded
I don't even know if he was, to the extent that he was not really made aware of what she did because it was an ongoing case. So they were well, this is an ongoing case, we don't want to get into the details. And so he never really got to know the details.
Yeah, and every time I tried to say anything, her attorney on that side did what she was hired to do.
What an attorney should do.
Yeah, shut me up every single time I tried to say something that would make Jane look bad.
Yeah.
And actually tell the truth of what she actually did. But I would like to point out that all of those times that I told you about previous relationships where she had been arrested and tried for assault was in that very same courthouse. So there's absolutely no reason that he did not know the background of the person that he was bringing into his courtroom. He had every avenue to be able to get that information.
Well, the problem I've found is that when it comes to the courts and the states and everything, literally the right hand and the left hand don't even know what the fuck is happening with each other. It's totally, it might as well be different universes. And it's really unfortunate. I think that a lot of people, when they go into a court, they have an idea that it's a lot more objective and rational than it ends up being. You literally have to do all the work yourself. And you would assume that having a lawyer, they would think of everything. But they don't. They're more concerned with procedure. And then it's kind of up to you to think of everything. And no one's prepared to do that.
Well, yeah. Well, and even above and beyond that, I really did try to think about everything. Yeah. As you saw, I brought a mountain of evidence with me in there. And subsequent to the fact that, he didn't really know anything about, Jane, he didn't even read any of the evidence. The evidence which included police reports from her actually being arrested for physical assault and the actual CPS report for where, she was, brought under investigation and found culpable for actually doing this, abuse to this kid, and he ignored every single bit of that. Ignored every circumstance, then proceeded to berate me for the fact that I had not spent any time with my son up to this point and that I wasn't a very good father. Yeah. Again, completely ignoring the circumstances of why this happened. I mean, any idiot worth their salt can look at that situation and go, okay, very clearly something is wrong here. Explain to me what happened. And he didn't care. He didn't want it explained to him. All he wanted to do was to make it cut and dry, bang his gavel, and make yet one more man the bad guy, regardless of what he did or did not do. And he ended up, as you very well know, since you were there, he ended up giving me what little bit of time, 3 hours of custody a week with my son. This was during my work hours where I would end up losing my job if I was to actually spend time with my son. And then furthermore tells me that this woman that lied so many times about me, physically abused me, did all these horrible things to me, I would have to go behind closed doors privately with her and Carolina, so with Jane and Carolina, and learn how to actually parent my son from them and put myself in extreme risk, which kind of goes back to one thing that we discussed earlier where you pointed out, she told you that she's just gonna, like make up stuff about you, right?
Right.
She did. There was many times where she told me right to my face, even if you do get custody, as soon as you drop your kid off, I'll just give him an Indian burner, I'll hit him, and I'll just call the cops and say that you did it.
Right.
And you saw over all this time, or you've heard about over all this time where like, every single time I would have hard evidence and I would call the cops and say she did something wrong. They refused to do anything. Yeah. They fought me on it and they would not hold her accountable. Yeah. Me, on the other hand, it did not matter how cockamamie the things that she said were, how insane her remarks were.
You saw the writing on the wall. You were like, I'm not going to... Yeah, I understand.
Exactly, yeah. I was going to go to jail because they were going to have the ability to do that to me. Right like that. So I tried to speak with the attorney that I had at that time, Absalom, and his boss, Sean, and say, what do I even do about this? You have got to appeal this. And they basically said, no, we will not do that for you. And even if we did do that for you, you will not win because you're a man in Colorado.
Is that what they said?
Literally, that's word for word what they said to me. You're a man in Colorado and you will not win. So we will not even make an attempt to fight for you. You only have one of two choices. You either do not go and spend parenting time with your son, and you will be held in contempt of court because that was a judge's order that you spend time with that kid, and you'll end up going to jail for being held in contempt of court. Or you go and you spend time with that kid, and you put yourself in the danger that they will make up lies about you, and you will invariably end up going to jail because they made up a lie and it was believed, regardless of how zany it is.
And you did make some attempts to make a visitation.
Oh, I did. I did. And at that point, once I made my attempts to do the visitation, they refused to respond to me for like almost a week. And that was outside of the purview of the time that I was given to engage. Yeah. Like the judge told me I only had like 3 days to engage.
Well, so the judge was like, between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. you can go make this visitation happen. And then you asked your boss if you could do that. Your boss was like, no. So you tried to arrange some other time outside of that window. They made...
excuses, said that this is his bedtime. You can't come and see him at 6 or 7 o'clock at night after work. And deliberately made it so that I had no options. They backed me in a corner and took away every single option I had.
Which is, why would the judge, I guess the judge, because you worked from home, assumed that you could leave the home to go drive around and stuff. You know what I mean?
But I'm working.
Right, exactly.
Like I mean, just because you work in your office, that's no different than working from home.
Right.
Are you able to just at any point in time just get up and leave because you have things?
Right.
Like, no. You have a responsibility to do, and that's how you get your pay.
Yeah, so it is kind of strange that the judge chose those hours. And then it is strange that he didn't just say from 6 to 9 instead of from 3 to 6.
Exactly, yeah. Like I was having to like pick 1 hour between 3 to 6, and I definitely couldn't do it any time before 5.
Right.
And then from 5 to 6, with the way traffic is in Denver, Colorado, and how far apart we live, I wouldn't even get to her by 6.
Right.
You know, I wouldn't get to my son by 6.
Well,
I would have 5 minutes a day. I'd be able to see that boy.
Yeah, and so it was like the fact that so she assaulted you, and that was why the restraining order was in place. And they were using the restraining order as a pretense. Well, we can't work it out because of the restraining order. And then the judge was like, oh, well, it can go through the mom, Carolina. And then, I don't know. And then you're also in this double bind where it's like, oh, you either comply with the order and risk this situation where they are just going to lie about you, or Jane is going to lie about you. You have to comply to the order, but they don't have to comply to the order.
Yeah, they are not held accountable to anything in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
But all that being said, so, you know, at the end of that court hearing, that judge had ignored physical abuse towards me, ignored physical abuse towards an infant child, ignored physical abuse towards ex-partners, ignored, violations of protective orders and bonds and all kinds of stuff. Basically, just her spitting in the face of the law. They ignored all of that. Let her get away with everything that she did with absolutely no, fallback. No consequences for any one of her actions that she committed. And I was the only one that was, punished here. I tried to do the right thing the entire time and do everything I could to provide for my son, to try to be there for this woman, even though she was treating me horrible, and to try to make the best of a horrible situation and do the right thing. And ultimately, all I did was get punished for it. And, now I essentially am stuck where there was one out that attorney found. And I believe the only reason why this happened is because they discussed this with the other side, with Jane's attorney, of how they want to end this. And they said, the only out that I have is to temporarily give up my parenting time, because you know how it's like every 2 years you can change the circumstances of these. And they told me, look, you either sign this, Absalom, and his boss Sean tells me, you either sign this paper and give up your parenting time, or you're going to go to jail in some way or another.
They literally told you that.
Yeah, and set me in a situation where I was literally coerced into making this decision because of fear, and the fact that they were just gonna stand back and watch while I just went to jail and everything fell down around my ankles. So what would any person do in a situation like that? You take the thing that will keep you out of jail and allow you to continue living your life, and furthermore allow me to at least pay child support for my son so I could be there to take care of him. Because I don't get to be there for him or take care of him in any other facet whatsoever. The only thing I can do is make sure that money is there in full on the first, so that he has everything that he needs. So that happened. And that leads me to my last point here. And that is, the very next day after this court hearing, they scheduled Jane to go before a court for physically assaulting me. She claimed that she was incompetent and that she was mentally retarded and that she was too incompetent to understand the consequences of the actions that she was committing. So basically, due to severe mental retardation, again, just descriptor, they let her off on all of those charges. And she was able to basically, say that because she was too dumb, for the lack of a better term, to understand what she was doing was wrong, that she should be allowed to get away with everything she did, even though she was on recording physically assaulting me and screaming, "I don't give a fuck, take my ass to jail," literally spitting in the face of the law. And they let her get away with that and let her off on all charges because she was too incompetent, which I would like to point out that just 24 hours prior, she was perfectly competent and she was the best choice possible to be a parent for a child and to care for this child and provide all the needs for this kid to have a healthy childhood and a healthy upbringing. Yet just 24 hours later, she's too incompetent to even realize that bad means bad and wrong means wrong.
Right.
And so it's literally the entire system, doing a catch-22 and ignoring every last one of this woman's crimes and letting her get away with it. I'd like to put in a whole recording of her actually screaming at the top of her lungs, stating she never even wanted this baby to begin with. She never even wanted to be a mother, and that she did not want to take on this responsibility, and she did not want a kid. She went as far as to say in this recording that she wants to dig a knife in her stomach and carve this baby out so she doesn't have to be a mother. And yet, she went this far to destroy me in the way that she did and take everything from me in the way that she did out of pettiness. Because nothing else in this situation makes any sense. I did nothing wrong. I did not deserve to be treated in this way. I did not deserve to, have someone go out of their way and try to, get me in trouble, other than pettiness. So, yeah. Well, that's my story here. I know it was a pretty long one, and it was maybe hard to understand at certain points. Like I was saying earlier, I may very well go ahead and just put up my original video to clarify any of this stuff.
Yeah. What I was thinking we could do is break this into maybe 10-minute sort of episodes and then post the full one somewhere. And I think, he also did a full sort of breakdown of it where he's like talking to the camera. And I think that we should also host that speech you gave at the Child Support Commission hearing.
Yeah.
I'll find a copy of that and then download it because that's floating around. And let's see. But yeah, I think that we've got a lot of story to cover here. And, maybe we should do a follow-up interview too, because I wonder if it's even possible to like articulate the scale of the damage that all of these careless decisions have like caused. Like all of Jane's decisions seem very reckless and careless in a way that has untold damage to untold numbers of lives,
Oh, absolutely. She not only ruined my life, but she ruined my son's life.
Yeah.
She took from me certain things that I can never have back. I feel as though every man deserves to see his child be born. Obviously, notwithstanding extenuating circumstances, like a soldier in war, he can't just like leave to go see his kid. But like with no extenuating circumstances whatsoever, a man deserves the right to at least stand outside of the glass partition and see his child be born. Or for that matter, actually have a hand in these formative years. And this part where the child is bonding with his parents and getting to know who they are. I'm legitimately scared now that not only will she fill my son's head full of notions like I'm a bad person, that I was the one who did all this, total lies, but furthermore that he wouldn't even know who I am, and that he would be scared if he ever, if I ever got an opportunity to spend some time with him, because he doesn't know me.
Yeah.
And that's unfair to that child.
Right.
That child does not deserve to have to feel such like that's dejecting in and of itself. A child should not have to feel that so young.
Right.
And like what are the far-reaching impacts of that? Like we don't know really how much.
Well, who knows who your son will become? And who knows if he becomes more like Jane than like you? Who knows what he might go on to do?
Exactly. And without a father in his life, he is very much so at a greater risk for being incarcerated or finding himself in like a less than favorable like situation in life, like not learning how to be a good
man. And I gotta tell you, the amount of people I met in prison who had mothers just like Jane, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
At least half of them, and it's just crazy. That level of dysfunction is like, it swallows up things in its wake and makes everything, makes more things like itself,
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I think we should do a follow-up interview maybe to just talk about maybe some of the more, not stuff related to the case itself, but just the larger implications of
the
everything.
emotional impacts of it all. Things such as how I was saying earlier, that this has broken me inside so bad that I don't even think I'm ever going to find love in my life again.
Or even patterns, like because you grew up without your biological father.
Exactly.
And so how does that play into your son growing up without his biological father? Stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. But at any rate, though, everything that had happened in this situation caused me such great emotional damage. And even her, with all of her like psychotic decisions and her weird way of doing things. I say weird way because I don't understand her motivation for anything. But even with all of that, I strongly believe this must have been emotionally damaging for her as well. It's just. It wasn't okay for anyone involved, and none of it should have ever happened.
Yeah.
And if this is the last thing I want to say about this, but like if the system, as it were, that exists right now would stop doing this blanket decision nonsense where they just say, a man's a man's a man. A lot of men have been bad guys in the past, so just because you have a penis, you must be a bad guy too. That is inexcusable, and there is absolutely no reason why that type of thought process should go into a court of law in the United States of America. That's laziness, and that boils down to the fact that they do not want to actually do their jobs correctly to actually understand what is happening in this case. Because I get it. If you had to sit there every single day and every single case, you had to review a caseload and understand it, it would give you a headache by the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these people in judges' positions and whatnot, they have this holier-than-thou complex that they don't feel as though they should have to be subjected to that level of work.
Yeah, they tell you what it is. They don't want to be told what it is.
Exactly. Yeah. And which, again, is disgusting because this is a nation of the people, by the people, for the people. The notion of having, like, a judge like that just tells you what he says and what is going to happen regardless of what the law says, isn't that one of the big things outside of taxation without representation of why we decided to commit a revolutionary act and secede from Great Britain?
It's crazy. I really wonder how long it's been like this because I don't think I've run into I have not run into too many judges, but more... My judge was like that. My judge didn't care about the nuance of what was happening. My judge just was very similar.
Yeah, but at any rate, if they were held accountable and judges were forced to actually do their job, I know it might slow down the criminal justice system, and it will slow down the criminal justice system.
Well, the criminal justice system's too big anyway.
Yeah, and it's already too big, it's already too slow, it's already too much of an unwieldy
for
beast.
Dumb bullshit anyway.
Yeah, stupid.
And I'm not talking about my crime. I mean, I'm talking about drug offenders, I'm talking about petty bullshit, stealing a lawnmower, whatever,
Yeah, just simple petty stuff, but regardless, if... At several points along the line, if there was someone there that made police accountable for their actions, and, if they refused to do their job because of some personal feeling that they don't think that they should hold someone accountable for their actions, which is exactly what happened here. They personally felt because she was a woman, they didn't want to hold her accountable, which is them taking their power as a police officer and abusing it and deciding that they know better than the law of the land that has been written in stone for them to follow.